Welcome students. I am Professor Naval Kishore from School of Management Studies, Indira Gandhi National Open University, New Delhi. You have already learnt about the features, importance of planning, process of planning, forecast as an elements of planning, as well as limitation of planning. Today, I am going to discuss about types and principles of planning. Types of planning, based on the function of planning, the planning may be categorized into following four categories, that is based on degree of comprehensiveness and time span. For the degree of comprehensiveness, the planning may be divided into strategic planning and tactical planning. Similarly, for the time span, it may be divided into long-range planning and short-range planning. Let us learn them. The first is strategic planning. This word has come from the military. You know well that if the military of one person want to attack on the other country, then he has to go for the strategic planning in terms of how much army he requires, how much air force he requires, how many naval persons he requires, and then he had to completely plan that at what place he had to target that. So exact specific place to be targeted, exact army personnel, air, naval personnel to be required, exact arms and ammunition which are to be used for that attack. All these things are very, very precisely decided well in advance. Similarly, for the business purpose also, the process of determining the integrated organization-wide course of action to achieve the major objective of the organization. So here the focus is about integrated aspect of the organizational course of action. Next, formulation of strategies which are in the nature of critical and intelligent courses of action to gain upper hand over competitive and other complex external forces in the environment. Here you have to analyze this, that you require to have the critical and intelligent course of action. Critical means you have to think both plus and minus side of that particular event, positive and negative side of that event, and you have to think intelligently so that the appropriate course of action could be identified. And you need to be competitive. That means you need to have upper hand than that of your competitor, and this upper hand you need to have once you analyze a whole range of external forces in the environment so that you become competitive. For example, what are the most significant market and the opportunities of that particular market, which is relevant for your enterprise. Again, you have to think the kinds and complexities of external problems, threats and constraints forced by the enterprise. For example, if you want to introduce a new product, now there must be various types, many products in the market. Now you have to think their strategy, how do they market their own product, how did they provide that customer satisfaction, how do they retain the customer, how much market share they are having, so on and so forth. The whole range of complexities and external problems are to be analyzed, and associated opportunities and threats are also to be identified. Next is, how should the enterprise take advantage of relevant opportunities and tackle the threats. Once you identify the opportunity and threat, you need to think over that how best those opportunity you can take for your organization. How best you can minimize the threats and limitations and weaknesses of that event, happenings. For example, you want to capture certain percentage of that market of, let's say, even that TV industry, electronic industry. Now you have to analyze the whole factors which are influencing your electronic industry. Even the garments, let's say, the fashion industry, you want to establish a garment, let's say on the small sector, you want to establish a garment store, a fashion store. Now you have to think about how many stores are there in the market, how they are marketing their own products, fashion products in that particular store. And the whole range of profitability, market analysis, market trends, available customers, etc., all those things are to be analyzed. And for this purpose, you need to have, sometimes maybe you have to think about the advertisement, you have to think about the campaigns, you have to think about the new products detail, you have to think about improved products, and you have to think about the whole strategy of your rivals. That means the enterprise should concentrate its efforts to retain the competitive dominance or to enhance the competitive dominance. That means if you want to retain your dominance in the market, you have to be very, very well strategic planning, you have to go for that. The plan strategically must be very, very precise, very, very achievable, which you can easily execute that plan. And for this purpose, for example, you need to have the whole range of analysis of your own resources. For example, investment funds, how much fund you have, how can you can mobilize, how can you can invest, customer goodwill, what is the market value of the goodwill, customers loyalty, distribution network, research and development facilities, etc., are to be analyzed. Along with that, you have to think the goals of growth, diversification, profitability, competitive power, market share, and so on and so forth. Because if you have competitive power, if you have some market share in that, obviously you would like to retain that market share, and you need to be well planned so that that market share is retained by your organization. Next is tactical planning. Tactical planning is more specific functional sub-plans so that it could be implemented in the organization. See, because it is on that operational level, focused toward the operational level, therefore, detailed decisions and actions are to be initiated at lower managerial levels. For example, you have to think about size of the operations, product types, product sizes, quality ranges, customer services, distribution channels. Because all these things are at the operational level, therefore you need to have the detailed of this, because it should be at a specifically specified and documented, and the manager should also be aware about all these ranges. In addition to that, the coordinated and time bound basis. It should be coordinated and it should be the time bound basis. For example, about the operational planning, if you want to double the volume of your products in the 4 years, 5 years, now how you are going to go for that? Every year, that if it is a 5 years you want to double, every year you want to 20% increase, or you want to expand your manufacturing process, you want to make or buy, you want to manufacture or you want to buy from the market. You have to think about your own growth pattern and acquisition and mergers, etc., etc. You have to think about foreign collaboration and so on and so forth, so that you could do in a much, much better way. But both strategic planning and technical planning are interdependent also, because one is about focus on the strategy, another is more focus on the operations, so both are interdependent. Next is about long-term planning, that is long-range planning. The process of formulating the long-range objectives of an organization and determining the ways and means of achieving objectives. So in the long-range planning, what you do, you just identify the long-run objectives for your organization, and you have to think about ways and means, that how that long-term objectives may be achieved by your organization. So you have to think about. So it indicates the extent of future time horizon. That means, as I said you, that if you are going to establish an industry, obviously it will be take more time. If you are going to have your departmental store, it may be less time. If you are going to have the kirana store, maybe the less time. So the duration and limit of long range differs from enterprise to enterprise and from situation to situation. For some organization it may be 3 to 5 years, for others it may be 25 to 30 years. If you want to set up a power plant, obviously the power plants will take a very, very long period. It may take 20 years, it may take 30 years. If you are going to create the dam, now if you are going to set up a dam, obviously it may take 25 years, 30 years, so on and so forth. Next is about short range planning. The process of formulating short range objectives and deciding the course of action to achieve these objectives. This is a less period of time. This planning is for the less period of time. It may be 1 year or less. What you do in the short range planning, you break down long range plan into compact and actionable programs. Because long-term plans, for example, as I said, you want to just have the 20 crores of your sale for the next 5 years. Now, if you want to have 20 crores, do you want to 4 crores each year? You want to achieve like that. Like that, if you want to achieve 5% of the market share, so how in how many years you are going to achieve that 5%? So you need to break that. So in the short run, this is the action oriented. This is more detailed, because corporate planning or long range planning is for the long term perspective and it is for the short term perspective. So therefore it is more detailed, it is more specific, it is more quantitative. You have understood about the strategic planning, tactical planning, long range planning and short range planning. Now let us come to the principles of planning. Obviously, because planning is a guidelines for the whole organization, therefore the planning must be based on certain principles. Those principles are: first, principle of top management interest. Look, the planning is for the whole organization, and the persons involved in the managerial activities in that organization, they must be aware of the plan, aware of the implementation strategy. Moreover, the top management must be interested in that plan. They must take interest while the formulation of planning as well as the implementation of the planning, as well as the monitoring of the planning. If they take interest, if they are involved while preparation of the planning, while formulation of the planning, it becomes easier to have the organization level plan as well as the departmental level plan. So their interest, the interest of the top management is required for the formulation and implementation of planning. Next is principle of long range view. See, the long range view, whatever you are going to market, whatever you are going to manufacture, it is not the quick way. Rather, it is a long range perspective of your organization. That is, in how many years you will have the research and development activities in your organization. How many years and how many products you are going to market. How many additional new activities you are going to adopt there. So the long range view you have to think over whenever you are planning. It is not that only today or tomorrow or short term view, rather it is the long term perspective of your organization. Next is principle of contribution to objectives. Obviously, every organization has some objectives. They have their own mission and vision. So the whole organization, the people involved in that organization, they are trying to strive for the attainment of those objectives. And objectives are defined in a clear cut. So these are the objectives, and you have to make all the effort in such a way that you are able to achieve those objectives. Next is principle of primacy of planning. See, planning holds the prime position in the process of management. Prime position means based on the planning, you go for the other functional activities of management. That is organization, direction, coordination, control, etc., etc. So therefore, the planning is the primacy of all other managerial activities. Next is principle of flexibility. As you all know that environment is very dynamic. Environment keeps on changing. The whole range of socio-economic scenario of the country may keep on changing. Because environment is dynamic, you need to be flexible. How best your planning may be suitable to the changing environment. If you are able to suit the requirement of the changing environment, you are successful. If you are not able to cope up with the changing environment, you face a lot of problems. Therefore, you need to be flexible. Next is principle of navigational change. As you know, the navigation, it is from the ship. So you are navigating a ship. Like that, whenever there is a small changes, your planning course of action may change. If you have that procedures, if you have that culture in your organization, and you are able to make the navigational changes in your planning process, you may be successful. Next is principle of commitment. Principle of commitment means whatever period is there, whatever you have committed to achieve in a particular period, in a particular span of timing, you need to be committed for that. You need to achieve that. This is called principle of commitment. If you have committed that this work will be completed in 1 month, obviously you need to complete that work in 1 month. For example, if you want to complete an IAS examination, so for the IAS examination, whatever is that your preparation for 2 years, 3 years, you must be completely devoting and you must be committed for that 3 years so that you pass an IAS examination. Next is principle of the limiting factor. Obviously, every process has certain limitations, every activity may have certain limitations, so you need to identify those limitations, and based on those limitations, you need to make your program so that that limitation, the influence and impact of that limitation may be less on your organization. If you are able to analyze those limitations, so therefore you need to follow the principle of limiting factor. Whatever is the limiting factor, you need to be aware of those limiting factors so that you could plan in the most effective way. Next is about decision making. You all know that a decision is a choice whereby a person performs a conclusion about a situation. That means there are various choices, and based on your requirement, you are going to decide the best possible choice in a particular situation. This represents a course of behavior about what must or what must not be done. So here you decide that which activity is to be performed and which activity need not to be performed. A decision is an act of choice wherein an executive forms a conclusion about what must be done in a given situation. That means a decision represents behavior chosen from a number of possible alternatives. As I suggested you that if there is any activities, you have the number of choices. For example, if you pass the BCom examination, now right now you have to think that after passing the BCom examination, what do you want to do? Are you going to go for the competitive examination? Are you going to appear in the CA, ICWI, CS, in the Indian Administrative Services, that is IAS examination, banking examination, so on and so forth, you have to decide. That means decision making is an act, choice, possible alternatives you have to think, you have to analyze, and you have to decide a particular course of action. As far as the process of decision making is concerned, the process involves first identification of problem or opportunity. Here you need to identify what problem is there. For example, I gave you example that you want to appear in Indian Administrative Services. Now you have to think the whole range of the issues involved in appearing in Indian Administrative Services. Similarly, if you want to set up a fashion store, you have to think whole range of activities involved in that fashion store. So the first thing, what exactly you want to do, that you have to think. Next is you have to explore possible alternative. For example, if you want to appear in the Indian Administrative Service examination, you have to think over how you are going to prepare, what are the other similar examinations, what other competitive examination you can appear. Similarly, if you want to set up a store, you have to think about which product, what are the other products in that area, what are the other location in that area, so on and so forth. Next is evaluation of alternative. You need to evaluate all these alternatives, considering that what are the strengths, what are the limitations, what are the weaknesses, whole range of strength, weaknesses, opportunity and threat you need to analyze so that you could decide the best possible way. Next is selection of the best alternative. Now you have to think that when you have analyzed the different course of action, you have to think that which one is the best for you. For example, if you see the competitive examination, whether going for CA is best for you, whether going for the Indian Administrative Service is best of you, whether going for the competitive examination like banking services is best for you, whether going for the railway examination is best for you, you have to think about, and this thinking should be based on the risk involved, the economy of effort, and the situation or timing. You have to think how much risk it is having. You have to think how much effort is required for that, how much time it requires. All these things you need to analyze in detail. Next is limitation of resources. Obviously, every activity, every objective, every goal is associated with the limitation. So you have to think that how you are going to deal with those limitations. Limitations may be related to marketing, limitations may be related to finance, you may have the limited finance, you may have the limited human resources. So those things you have to think that how best you can perform despite the limited resources. Next is about implementation of decisions. Whatever decisions you have taken, how you are going to implement, because the execution of the decisions must be in a very, very precise way. You have to think about how you are going to execute the whole process of the decisions which you have taken. If you have decided to go for the IAS examination, you have to think the whole strategy. You have decided to go for setting up this retail store, you have to follow it. If you want to set up an industry, you have to implement it very, very precisely, very, very successfully, very, very effectively. Next is follow up. Whatever you have decided, you need to follow up all these decisions. So you have already understood about the planning process, principles. Then you have also understood about the decision making. Thank you very much.